I gotta keep it real. I think a lot of founders today are starting brands for reasons that won't hold up once the business gets more difficult. Let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome to the channel. I'm Lesley, seasoned consumer marketer and founder of Brand Botany, a fractional CMO consultancy. Over the years, I've spent a lot of time around founders of emerging consumer brands, and I want to talk about some of the observations I've made around the motivations behind why people start CPG brands. And I think this matters because eventually every founder reaches a point where the business may ask more of them than they expected. But first, let's take a step back because we're in a moment where more people want to start a consumer products brand than ever before. And in many ways, that makes sense. The barriers to entry are a lot lower than they used to be. You can source products more easily, launch a Shopify store quickly, run ads almost immediately, and start building awareness online without the kind of infrastructure that was typically reserved for Fortune 500s. And as a result of this shift in my work as a consultant, I've interacted with dozens of would be and early stage founders through one on one conversations, networking events, online communities, you name it. And in many of those interactions, I started noticing very different founder mindsets. Some founders are building with very clear intent and purpose. They have a strong insight, a differentiated product idea, or a very specific reason they believe their brand should exist. On the other hand, there are also founders who seem much more caught up in the broader founder momentum itself, where the attraction is less about solving a real problem and more about becoming a founder. And I think that becomes a major issue because building and sustaining a consumer products business is often much more demanding than most founders expect going into it, which is why I think some founders are building consumer brands for the wrong reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons people get pulled into this space right now is simply the feeling that everyone else is building something. You can't really escape it. You'd have to be living under a rock not to hear about new startups, venture funding, and high profile exits. Through LinkedIn, headlines, social media, and even your broader network, you're constantly exposed to founder stories and emerging brands. And after a while, it starts feeling less like the unusual path and more like something you should be considering too. Not necessarily because you have a deeply differentiated idea or a strong long-term conviction around the business, but because building a brand starts feeling like the thing that ambitious people are doing. And you're ambitious, right? Eventually, whether consciously or not, it starts to reshape how you think about your own career trajectory. And I believe this creates a subtle pressure that people don't always recognize in themselves. The pressure to build something, to have a founder story, to participate in the momentum you see happening around you. But building a consumer products business is a very specific commitment. It's years of operating complexity, financial pressures, all in execution and personal sacrifice. And if your primary motivation is simply feeling that you should be building something because everyone else appears to be doing it, I think that foundation gets tested pretty quickly at the first sign of a storm. The next one is a little different because it's less of a direct motivation and more of an assumption I see founders make all the time. A brand breaks through in any category: beauty, wellness, wine and spirits, you name it. And before long, their approach starts feeling like a formula that could be easily replicated. The branding is strong. The product is compelling. The retail momentum is impressive. And from the outside, it becomes easy to think, why couldn't I build something similar? But I believe this is where a lot of founders can oversimplify what actually made those brands work in the first place. Because usually there were deeper factors underneath that brand success that only the internal team is fully aware of. For instance, timing. Perhaps that brand was a first mover or entered the market before the category became saturated. Or they had a very specific consumer insight. In many cases, that insight reveals a real consumer need or frustration that the founder believes they can solve. Product market fit. The product resonated with consumers in a way that created repeat purchase, advocacy, and momentum. A founder with a strong point of view or relevant expertise. Maybe they're a celebrity esthetician, a Miami bartender, or someone who spent years immersed in the category. Distribution advantages. Sometimes the brand had relationships, access, or resources that open doors much earlier than most founders would normally expect. Operational execution. Some brands may have a founder or a leadership team with the experience and expertise to make better decisions as the business grows. And sometimes it's just plain old luck. Whatever it is, by the time you discover that breakout brand, you're usually seeing a much more refined version of their business. You're not necessarily seeing the earlier positioning, the iterations, or even the significant rebranding that may have happened before the brand became widely recognized. By that point, the business can look much more straightforward and replicable than it actually is. And from my perspective, this is part of the reason so many brands today feel increasingly interchangeable, because a lot of brands are being built from inspiration at the surface level rather than from a truly differentiated reason to exist. This is where a lot of newer founders get themselves into trouble. They see the finished version of a successful brand without appreciating everything behind the scenes. And as a result, they often enter categories with unrealistic expectations about what the journey really looks like. Because eventually, every founder reaches the point where that early excitement wears off and the business becomes much more demanding. And that's usually when the original motivation starts getting tested in a very real way. So if you're thinking about launching a consumer products company or you're already building one, I think it's worth asking yourself, why am I really starting this brand? And is your reason strong enough to carry you through what building a consumer products business actually requires over time? But this is really only one side of the conversation, because some of the deeper issues start showing up once the motivations become more personal. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about the reasons people want to become founders, not necessarily the reason their brand should exist. This includes motivations like the desire for visibility, identity, financial upside, the idea of building something that feels exciting or validating externally. That's what I want to explore next on this topic. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to watch out for part 2. So what did you think? If you're a founder watching this video, I'd love to hear from you. What motivated you to start your brand? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.